Hello and welcome again now to part 2 of our conversation with Professor David Redlawsk, Chair of the Department of Political Science and International Relations at the University of Delaware. Thank you for joining us once again, Professor. And your co-host Paul Marchand, Repman Steve Cody over here to your far right. And today, this time, we're going to start discussing a little more about Trump in the future and what's going to happen with his communication style and practices and how it will affect the political landscape moving forward. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Repman himself for the first question.
Every day is loaded with Trump tweets. When does Trump tweet fatigue set in, and it just becomes the norm, or will it never become the norm?
So let me start by saying I hope my predictions are better this time around than they were last year.
He predicted Hillary would win in a landslide.
Of course, right? So who didn't, right?
Yeah, right.
It's fascinating in a way because early on there was a lot of talk, or rumblings at least, about why is the media covering these tweets? Why does the media focus on them? Trump's out shooting off his mouth in a sense through the tweets, but they really ought to focus on the real work of the government and not give him that platform, right? Because most people aren't on Twitter. Most people are finding out about it through the media. But of course, anything Trump says is news.
Yes.
The media cannot ignore what he says. And so instead, we've gotten essentially an obsession with Trump's tweets. Mm-hmm. And the news reports are really, what did Trump tweet today? How does that have anything to do with what policies are underway today? And how is he undercutting his own government? Yeah. There is, I think, some fatigue with that already, but nonetheless, you can't stop.
Yeah.
Right? The media can't stop. And as long as the media can't stop covering this, and Trump is reinforced in getting the publicity he craves, right? I mean, he is president, he'll get publicity, but he really craves being talked about on the shows. Mm-hmm. And the tweets seem to be a great way. We may be tired of it. It gets really hard to kind of sit there and what's the next thing, but he's not going to get tired of it.
Yeah. And I see these, I'm sorry, Paul, he's created his own news channel now, The Real News. And they're broadcasting what the Trump administration is accomplishing day by day so that the fake media don't ignore it or cover it up or whatever.
And that's actually fascinating. It's a fascinating use of the social media platforms, right? It's a fascinating way to try to go directly to the people. What's interesting is presidents have always tried to go directly to the people. They've always tried to go over the news media's head or over Congress's head or when they wanted something done. Mm-hmm. The question here, though, is where most presidents doing that would go over the heads of the media to the American people generally. Donald Trump's approach remains go to my core, to my base, and do nothing to try to reach out beyond it. That's the part of the strategy that seems really problematic. Mm-hmm. If he's intending to see Republicans win in 2018 and himself ultimately considering 2020.
Yeah, you had mentioned a word about fatigue. We've heard that word thrown around, disillusionment perhaps. We've also heard the word impeachment thrown around, and that's a word that you used in the first segment actually. Is there any legitimacy to that call? Obviously there are staunch Democrats who have talked about this. Those who are his staunch supporters say, well, this is just a witch hunt, echoing sort of his statements. Really, is there a legitimacy to this notion of there may be grounds for impeachment in something he says or does? If not, what will it take? What steps needs to be taken if somebody were to get impeached from the presidency?
Well, the first and most important thing to know about impeachment is it's a political process, not a legal process. So while the Constitution says a president may be impeached and convicted for high crimes and misdemeanors, it doesn't define what those are.
Yeah.
Ultimately, high crimes and misdemeanors are whatever the House decides they are in the impeachment, which is like an indictment, and the Senate decides they are in the trial. That means in the end, it probably doesn't matter a whole lot so far what Trump does. Now, I think if the Russia investigation goes to the core of something he's done as opposed to people around him, that might move things in a different direction. But for as long as Republicans who control Congress believe that there is more benefit to having Trump there, whatever that might be, than there is to losing him, there's no reason for them to move this forward. Let's step forward. Let's say by some semi-miracle the Democrats take control in 2018. I think it's a hard haul no matter how badly Trump's doing, just because it's very uphill in the House, and in the Senate they're defending most of the seats. But let's say they manage to do it. It only takes a majority in the House to actually impeach, that is, to indict the president. But it takes 2/3 in the Senate to convict.
Yeah.
So you might see something moving forward on impeachment after 2018 if things continue like they are. But it's very hard to imagine a scenario in which 67 senators vote to convict.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say, for Democrats who wish for impeachment, frankly, politically going into 2018, they're better with Trump in place than they would be with Pence in place.
Yeah.
And that's what you get as a president.
Yes. Speaking of Democrats, it seems like they still haven't gotten their act together in terms of what they are going to offer that's different than the Republicans.
Well, there's a lot going on. I mean, out parties have these challenges, right? Who are we? How are we going to message? What are we going to do? How do we win back? But the Democrats are dealing with the fairly unique situation of a guy who isn't even in their party, Bernie Sanders, trying to define what the party should do. And that's really problematic when you're a party. So the battle is partly internal, but it's partly being driven by this external guy who doesn't want to be a Democrat, but wants to tell the Democrats what they should do. Nonetheless, it is absolutely true. The Democrats have to develop clear messaging. Messaging is critical in any kind of campaign, whether it's political or anything else. And if you don't have a clear message that voters can connect to, then you don't have a lot of chance. But I will say, when it comes to congressional elections, it's also worth remembering a lot of politics is local, to paraphrase Tip O'Neill, and turns on local events
of course,
in many cases. So single national messaging is not necessarily the right answer to win back House seats. You've got to look at those district by district as well.
Yeah. So first prediction question I wanted to ask you. You've alluded to some things already. Any of the legislation that's in the pipe right now, so whether that's healthcare reform, tax reform, immigration reform, is anything going to happen at all in this year and going into next year?
It's going to be hard. You have a president who does not spend much time on the details of legislation, right? You normally expect the president to actually do some leadership when there's legislation that he wants. You expect him to buttonhole senators and representatives and push this through. In the House, he's likely to get much of what he wants, but the Senate is the sticking point, because individual senators want to be wooed, to be honest. And when you make enemies of individual senators in your own party, that's pretty challenging. Even so, what I think we may see some kind of bipartisan effort on the healthcare stuff, just because virtually nobody wants to see it completely collapse and burn, and it's clear something has to be done to help stabilize the markets. We'll probably see some kind of tax legislation, but it's probably going to be quite limited, not the kind of overhaul of the tax code that Trump promised. Because again, I don't know that you can get all of the Republican Party on board with the same plan. But I think we'll see something come out of there. Those are the two things right now. Immigration reform, nothing like what Trump's proposed is going to get through. Beyond that, it's hard to tell what else is going to happen.
Well, now I'm going to ask you to really go deep into your crystal ball, because there were rumors, not rumors, there were reports that Pence later said no way in hell that he's already, organizing to run in 2020, as are apparently a couple of other Republicans. Biden is making every indication that he's going to make a run on the Democrats. So who do you see, assuming he lasts that long, Trump's #1 competitor in the Republican Party to be nominated as candidate, and who do you see as the likely Democratic candidate?
I think on the Republican side, I think in fact Trump, if things continue as they are, will be very likely to draw a challenge, a primary challenge, much as Jimmy Carter drew a challenge from Kennedy in 1980.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Whether it would be Pence as the sitting vice president would of course be unprecedented, but why not? Everything's unprecedented with this. And it is clear Pence is doing the kinds of things you do if you're thinking of running. to my mind, it's much more likely in this context that Trump doesn't run again, that he says, I was there, I did it right, now I'm going to be an ex-president and rake in even more money.
Yeah.
And Donald...
So that's your prediction? He's a one-term president?
I think there's a reasonably high
interesting.
likelihood.
Really?
Because I don't think he likes being president on the job
Well, you made
part
my
of it.
day.
Again,
You made my day.
keep in mind last year's prediction.
Yeah, that's
so let's
true,
keep
too. You
that
have
in
no-
mind.
you have no credibility here at all.
None at all. I will tell you that on the Democrat side, I don't know that I can pick out anybody at the moment. Some of it is just that people aren't publicly terribly visible. That's one of the problems the Democrats face.
Yeah, there is
they don't
no
have the farm
superstar.
team. They
Yeah.
don't have, right, some of that farm team got wiped out in 2010 and again in 2014.
Yeah.
So even Elizabeth Warren?
But well, see, I think they could run. Warren, Sanders, Clinton herself, Joe Biden. They're the last generation, the
Yeah.
prior generation, and
Yeah.
for the Democrats to seriously move forward, they've got to move into a new generation.
Oh, nah, no question about it. You see Cory Booker as somebody who could go national and be a contender?
He certainly has some real appeal, right? And he's done a fairly good job in the Senate of both standing for democratic values, but also attempting to reach across at times. He certainly presents the kind of image that might work well for the Democrats. But it's actually a little hard to tell with him. Some people see him as a little too slick, maybe, or a little, I don't quite know what it is. It's
Yes.
one of those feelings
Yes.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, he does represent that next generation of potential leaders.
Right.
Yeah.
We have time for a final question?
We do, yeah.
Do you see yourself sharing a classroom one day with Chris Christie as maybe an adjunct?
So Chris Christie, Governor Christie is a blue hen.
Is he? Well, there you
he's
go.
a graduate.
One of your most
He's
successful
one of my
alums.
most successful alums. He's a graduate of our department.
I
of the
didn't know
political-
that.
our Department of
Wow.
Political Science.
Would you
at the
invite him
University of
back as a
Delaware.
guest
We'd
lecturer?
certainly invite him back as a guest lecturer. It also
He has to bring his own beach chair, though,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but and Delaware, by the way, has wonderful beaches.
Who knew?
So there you go. He might come just for that.
And actually, we did want to, and you may again have alluded to this, asking about midterm elections. We went all the way ahead to the potential
Yeah.
of Trump maybe not
Yeah.
if you're going for a second term. What about midterms in 2018? Where do you see it?
It is a tough road for the Democrats to take control in either the House or the Senate. In the House, partly because of gerrymandering, partly because not gerrymandering, but also just where people live kind of creates these safe Republican, safe Democratic
Yes.
districts, and there aren't enough safe Democratic districts. The other side of the coin, though, is the latest polling puts the Democrats in what we call the generic ballot. Would you vote for a Democrat or a Republican? Up double digits. If that really held, they could pick up the 26 plus seats that they would need. The special elections, while they haven't actually won any of them, have shown anywhere from 10 to 20 point shifts. That would suggest a rout by the Democrats if it held in 2018. But it's a long way away.
And
a
the
lot
last
to
time you
still
predicted a
happen.
route, it didn't turn out
It didn't turn
quite
out
that
so well.
way.
I think what I would expect to happen right now is the Democrats will pick up a significant number of seats. That typically happens in a midterm. The
Yeah.
opposite party
Yes.
does.
Yeah.
They may come just short of the House. Their real problem is the Senate
Right.
in terms of just holding where they are, because 2/3 of the seats that are up are Democratic seats, many of them in states that Trump did well. That's what they face.
Well, we really appreciate all your insight again, Professor Redlawsk. Thank you so much for
We're
joining us.
going to have you back
Happy
in
to be here.
2020.
Yeah, we'll do this once a year and see what happens.
Exactly.
Yeah, there we go.
No, we'll have you back for the midterms.
Yeah, let's say for the midterms.
But thank you so much.
You bet.
We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining, and to join us again next time for another segment of Rep TV.